The new ICT tax bill, which is otherwise known as the communication tax bill, has continued to generate controversies among industry players, operators and also consumers of telecoms products. Now, the new bill, which of course seeks to impose, charge and collect communication service tax on service fees, is payable by users of electronic communication services at 9%. If the bill is enacted into law, it will mandate service providers to file monthly tax returns with the Federal Inland Revenue, that's FIRS, with strict penalties for non-compliance. What does this whole tax issue mean for not just the telecoms providers, but for every Nigerian? Yesterday we started this conversation on the show, and today we're continuing as I'm being joined by the partner, Tax Services with Ernst & Young, Akinbiyi Abudu. Good morning, and thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we started this yesterday, and there wasn't much time to really dissect the issues. But let's begin by you telling us what this tax bill means.
Okay. Essentially, this is a tax on the consumer, as you indicated. It's a tax on mostly individuals. It's a tax that would increase or reduce the spending capacity of individuals, thereby essentially reducing consumption. In this case, particularly, most likely in regards to communication. But I think the first question that really needs to be asked is, what's our view of this tax, i.e., what's the validity of the tax, and in terms of also the fairness? So I think there are three concepts we need to think about when we're reviewing any tax, particularly this one. The first concept is the rate. What rate of tax is being applied? In this case, it's 9%. Generally, for consumption tax, which this is what this is, the rate is generally between 5, which is on the low side, and 15%. So at 9%, we would say the tax rate in this case is somewhere in the middle. So it's not too high, and it's definitely not low. The next step, and this is quite important given the history of Nigeria in terms of taxes, is the multiplicity of taxes, the issue of multiple taxation. To this end, we have currently several types of taxes in Nigeria. We have income tax, which is broken into corporate and personal. We have VAT, which is also a consumption tax, CGT, and stamp duty, the list goes on. There are also various taxes and levies on the local state side. So this communication tax would be an additional tax, increasing the issue of multiple taxation. The final point, I think, which is quite important, is the issue of double taxation. Double taxation is where you have a single income or transaction subject to multiple taxes, different taxes. It usually occurs in three scenarios. The first one is where you have two foreign jurisdictions, so Nigeria and, say, South Africa, taxing the same transaction or income. And that's why countries enter into double tax treaties to reduce occurrences of double taxation, or to mitigate it by reducing the rate. The second one, which unfortunately started a few years in Nigeria, is where you have double tax within a jurisdiction, where you have two tax authorities taxing the same income twice. A great example is the Lagos State consumption tax, where you pay when you go to the hotels or restaurants. So on that transaction, you go to a hotel, you get your bill, you're paying a VAT tax, which essentially is a consumption tax. At the same time, that goes to the federal government, because VAT is collected by the federal FIRS. And then you pay a consumption tax on the same transaction, that goes to the state. Okay, so that's the second. The third, which is the worst, the most egregious, is where you have the same authority taxing the same transaction twice. And unfortunately, I think, in my opinion, this consumption tax falls into that third category, where you have the FIRS is taxing on the same telecom transaction. There's going to be a VAT charge. A VAT charge is a consumption tax on the consumption, in this case, telecom services. That's at 5%. If this were to pass, you then have the so-called communication service tax at 9% on the same telecom, on the same service. It's not. You would need to remember when I said it's on the consumer. So it's not necessary. It's going to be passed on from the
from the providers of the services to the end
individual.
users.
So now you're paying VAT at 5% and also paying consumption tax at 9%. So given that, to summarize, given that the rate is not necessarily low at 9%, it's middle, it increases the issue of multiple taxes. It's another layer of taxes you have to pay. And then it's the most egregious form of double taxation.
Isn't the government aware of this? The fact that it is taxing the citizens in multiple folds?
That's a great question. I think we need to step back and think what's the reason for this? Obviously, we all know there's a shortfall of income with oil and gas, with the dwindling income from oil and gas. So the government is under pressure to raise funds and make up for that shortage from oil and gas. So this, I would surmise, is one of those attempts. Even though I think I should point out, to be fair, they've, as part of the bill, they've indicated some of the funds would be dedicated to unemployment. So that could be another factor in that.
Let's take a look at the timing of this tax, the introduction of this communication service tax bill. When we look at various conditions of Nigerian workers at this point, we have, of course, some of the workers have not been paid for several months. Okay, we have low income for many people. Our disposable income has dropped significantly. Many people cannot afford to buy the various requirements to make daily living. And right now, there's much pressure on the same set of people that don't have infrastructure. We do not have light, even for the telecoms. Many of them will have to invest a whole lot of money to get the businesses going. And now the pressure on the people. One would wonder why the timing for this communications tax. Do you think it is the right time to do this?
Well, I would say it's the right time. This is the right time to tackle the problem. We have a problem in terms of collections of revenue for the government. So we have an issue. We need to tackle it now. But I would disagree with this tax and with the way we're going about it, based on all the reasons you just indicated. This is it's a downturn in the economy. Consumers, individuals are suffering right now. Wages, are not increasing. Prices are skyrocketing. So the spending power is already threatened. So we should not want to decrease that even further. So I think, going back to my earlier comment, which is I think this is the right time to tackle it. What I would suggest, and we should not forget it hasn't been passed into law. It's just a bill. So comments from stakeholders could come in. What I would suggest, for instance, is and this is something that I would commend the current revenue officials, FIRs, currently led by Fowler, that they're doing right now is we have multiple taxes. So why not focus on compliance? Ensure people are paying their fair share.
Instead of introducing another kind of tax.
And they're doing that. They're doing that. They're looking at the existing laws. They're making sure people are complying. They've increased the audit focus on companies to ensure all companies are paying their taxes. That would be my first step. As a second step, I would actually go the opposite route, which is I would look for ways to maybe even reduce taxes. It could be controversial in the sense that, but it's
for companies or for individuals?
For both. It's a long-term strategy. It's a long-term view, and the strategy or the consensus is, in the long term, when you reduce taxes, you increase spending capacity, which in turn increases consumption and boosts the economy on a long-term basis. So a lot of, if we compare our tax rate to a lot of the developed nations, America, the UK, and whatnot, it's actually much higher, especially on the corporate side, which is, ours is about 30%. If you add education, it's 32%. A lot of those are in the 20s, early 20s. So,
but they have the basic infrastructure. They have good road networks that these monies are used to develop. But back here, we aren't seeing much changes, despite year on year we have to pay taxes both at the corporate levels and for individuals who pay payee, for instance. We aren't seeing much of this money is used in the right way.
And it also goes to tax incentives. The government can't do everything. So, but they're there to put policies in place to facilitate the private sector in doing its part. So if you have, and we do have some things in there like infrastructure, tax incentives, and whatnot. For instance, to boost exportation, we have exemptions on tax on export. But I think we need a little bit more. We need a little bit more on that, and realizing the fact that the government cannot do everything. They don't have all the funds. But for instance, if you have a state or a locale that you want to get developed, then you give tax holidays to companies. Companies will go there, they will develop it, and they know they're getting tax holidays for 5 years or 10 years. So it's a way, it should be a partnership with the government and the private sector.
Do you think that this bill will pass into law from how things have been going?
Well, I'm a bit worried. I think based on all I've said, it would create a very worrisome precedent.
Because a lot of people are kicking against it at this time.
My worry is ordinarily, and I'm not sure, I apologize, I'm not sure if this happened, but usually in recent times, when the new law comes in, they send stakeholders. There's a lot of debate
and consultation
that happens before it gets to this point. Before it's sent to the National Assembly, for instance.
Was that done?
I'm not sure that was done, or at least on a very large scale. If it was, maybe quite. It wasn't done on a large scale. So a lot of times we don't consider. We look at one route and one thing, but it has, especially with taxes, there are cascading effects. So we don't always look at all the cascading effects. So I'm hopeful that process can still happen now.
At this point.
At this point, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that it can still happen. And we can get those stakeholders, can come in and we can look at this. We understand there's a problem, but I'm not so sure this is the right way to solve it.
Okay, from the various penalties we've heard that have been lined up for the defaulters, these range from 50,000 naira for failure to file returns on due dates, and a further 10,000 naira for each day the tax returns are not submitted. It is not a lot of pressure on the telecom sector when we consider the challenging economic environment, not to even look at the fact that even compliance is still a bit of a problem.
Actually, I would disagree with that. Essentially, like I said, this is a tax on the individual. So they just need to apply it. And you have to, once you pay, you're paying. So it's easy to collect. And then the compliance, they're already doing the VATs. Essentially the same, and it refers to VAT in that regard. So the compliance, yes, it's additional. It's the issue of multiple taxation, multiple compliance. But compliant would not be, the burden is not really on the companies. It's on the individuals that have to pay it.
So we're going back to square one. You and me would have to pay this taxes. And you mentioned something earlier on that it is a ploy to reduce the consumption, but how do you think that will stop us from making calls as much as we want to?
Well, you know, just before joining you on stage, I was texting my wife. I was about to come on stage, and I did multiple texts, and I stopped for a second and said, well, you know, maybe I shouldn't be, you know, doing that. So, because then I'll be taxed twice, and that's, you know, that's basically how it would affect. So you're
also affecting some kind of changes on yourself.
Exactly. So you would start to reduce the amount, which unfortunately reduces income to the companies. And essentially,
so it's a chain reaction.
It's a chain reaction. Reduces their ability to hire more people, creating more unemployment for supposedly what you're trying to, you're trying to give income to unemployed based on this income, but you might create more unemployment from this action, so-called solution. So that's the cascading effect.
Oh, so we all need to look at all sides of the situation and ensure that we get the right, we make the right decisions for Nigerians. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
It's been a wonderful conversation with you. Akinbiyi Abudu, partner, tax services at Ernst & Young. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me
on the program.
Appreciate it.